Many Christians in America think America is past the point of no return. I don't. As a matter of fact, I believe the best is yet to come if. If what? That is the burning question we will explore today. This is Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is the Issue podcast, where I show how God is the issue in every issue. Now, many of you know I have terminal cancer. A few months ago, Kathy and I decided to stop the cancer treatments, at least for now. Why? Because I know God has called me to give everything I have to help God's people wake up to the opportunity they have before them. Like going off the treatments, I feel good and have energy again, but the price is a much shorter life. The reality is, I probably won't be here to see the tide shift in America once again become a shining light on a hill, but you could. So please listen for the next few minutes and ask God to show you how you can become part of the solution for America if you so choose. Now, the first step in solving a problem is to be brutally honest with yourself. So let me ask you, when Christians talk with each other about America, who do they usually blame for America's problems? Democrats, progressives, Republicans, all the above? Joe Biden, Donald Trump, George Soros, the deep state, the LGBTQ plus activists, Planned Parenthood, the Supreme Court, Hollywood? Do you know who we almost never blame? Ourselves. It's a lot easier to point the finger at someone else, isn't it? We've all done it. But politicians, judges, activists, and the entertainment industry are not the problem. We are. Let me ask you, if the darkness is growing, what is the fundamental problem? Can darkness overwhelm light? No, it can't. Darkness is simply the absence of light. Now, let me repeat that. Darkness is simply the absence of light, just like a vacuum is the absence of air. There are light waves, but there's no such thing as dark waves. There are light particles, but there's no such thing as dark particles. There are light bulbs, but there's no such thing as dark bulbs. You see, you can create light in a variety of ways, but the only way to produce darkness is to remove all sources of light. So if the darkness is growing, what's the problem? The problem is there's not enough light. In other words, pagans who walk in darkness are not the problem. Christians who aren't shining their light are the problem. And again, darkness is simply the absence of light, just like a vacuum is the absence of air. If the darkness is growing, it's because followers of Jesus are not reflecting the light of Jesus. The problem is the church of Jesus Christ in America today. The problem is not pagans who act like pagans. The problem is not college students who behave like 3-year-olds. The problem is not homosexuals who call you a hater because you think more highly of God's opinion than of theirs. The problem is not progressives who think America is the problem. The problem is not inflation, racism, illegal immigration, or abortion. The problem is Christians who act and think like pagans. The problem is Christian husbands who don't love their wives as Christ loved the church. The problem is Christian businessmen who say, it's just business. And the problem is Christian pastors who preach the gospel but love adulation, money, and sex more than Jesus. The problem is Americans who call themselves Christians but just don't love Jesus all that much. You see, the problem is followers of Jesus who are concealing their light. The problem is we aren't shining our light in the darkness. We aren't letting Jesus walk with our feet, work with our hands, love with our arms, and speak with our lips. Why? We're either too busy, too timid, too apathetic, or we just don't know how. Darkness is simply the absence of light. The darkness can't drive out light, but light casts out darkness. So the question is, how do we shine the light of Jesus in today's culture in such a way that people will gravitate toward the light? There are a lot of Christians these days who react to culture. They're trying to stop pagans from behaving like pagans. They're trying to stop spiritually blind people from behaving like they're spiritually blind. They're trying to stop people who walk in darkness from behaving as though they walk in darkness. These Christians mean well, but how's that working? Is our culture in better shape today than it was 20 years ago? If your primary strategy is to say, stop it, you will eventually lose. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm glad there are folks out there saying, stop it. Jesus said we are to be salt and light. Salt is a preservative that slows down decay. They are slowing down the cultural slide, and that's important, but they can never halt it or reverse it by saying, stop it. That's why Jesus modeled 90% light and only 10% salt. Now, there are other Christians who are trying to make their churches more seeker friendly in order to better reach pagans for Jesus. Again, they mean well, but how's that working? Is our culture in better shape today than it was 20 years ago? I'm glad they're trying to reach out to pagans, but it's not enough, not if we want to win America for Jesus Christ. Seeker friendly churches can only reach those who walk through the front door. Most pagans are never going to do that. And then there are other Christians who say we need to bring more people to church to hear the gospel from the pastor. Again, they mean well. But we all know that that strategy is not working for the same reasons I just mentioned. So, what do we do? Is there a proven strategy that can actually turn the tide? Yes, there is. There is a proven strategy. It has worked before in even more dire circumstances than we face today. And that's why I say it's not too late. The early church transformed a pagan Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire. Not by saying stop it, not by reacting to their culture, not by being seeker sensitive, not by inviting people to church, but by being light in the darkness, by reflecting the light of Jesus, by doing and speaking the good news. They let the love and message of Jesus infuse every part of their lives. You see, the Apostle Paul never told pagans to change their behavior, not once. He always told them to change their God. Did you catch that? The Apostle Paul never told pagans to change their behavior. He always told them to change their God. And in addition, although the Apostle Paul consistently contextualizes his message for his pagan audience, think of his Mars Hill discourse in Athens. He never left a part of the gospel off on the front end in order to be more seeker sensitive. Never. He always spoke the full gospel. The real genius of the early church was how they viewed God and then the process they used to engage culture. It was the same process that the Apostle Paul used that even most pastors today have either missed or ignored. It is the process reflected in Acts 19, verses 8 through 10. Let's take a look at the passage, but before we do that, let's take a look at the setting for Acts 19 so that you can understand what is going on. The Apostle Paul is in the city of Ephesus. And now, Ephesus is the second largest city in the Roman Empire. Think Los Angeles. It was the center of trade in the Roman Empire. Think New York City, Wall Street. All the major trade routes from Rome to China ran through Ephesus. Now, it was in the province of Asia, which is approximately where modern-day Turkey is. Asia was about the size of the state of Connecticut, which is about 110 miles across. Now, Ephesus was not in the middle of the province, but it was way over on the western edge, perched on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, let me read those 3 verses to you. I want you to listen for how long Paul preached the gospel versus how long he trained his disciples and what the result of that was. Paul entered the synagogue and spoke boldly there for 3 months, arguing persuasively about the kingdom of God. But some of them, referring to the Jews, became obstinate. They refused to believe and publicly maligned the way. Now, Christianity at the time was referred to as the way. So Paul left them. He took the disciples with him and had daily discussions in the lecture hall of Tyrannus. This went on for 2 years so that all the Jews and Greeks who lived in the province of Asia heard the word of the Lord. Question: how long did Paul preach the gospel? 3 months. How long did Paul have daily discussions training his disciples? 2 years. What happened in those 2 years? Well, every Jew and Greek in the province of Asia heard the gospel. How many people heard? Everyone. Now, Paul was holed up in Ephesus for those 2 years. So how did all the Jews and Greeks in the entire province of Asia, up to 100 miles away, hear the gospel during those 2 years? Now, remember, there's no TV, radio, or internet. There aren't planes, trains, or cars, and Paul was in Ephesus the entire time. How did every Jew and Greek in Asia hear the word of the Lord? Obviously not from Paul, but from Paul's disciples, a lot of whom were businessmen and businesswomen, traders. Remember, all major trade routes ran through Ephesus. And what did traders do? Traders traveled in order to buy and sell goods. Now, in the process, they simply talked about Jesus everywhere they went, just like Paul taught them. Now, think of honeybees. What do honeybees do? They collect pollen from this flower, from that flower, and the next flower, and then they take it back to their hive in order to turn it back into honey. But what happens in the process? They pollinate every plant that they land on. And that is exactly what happened in the province of Asia. Traders fanned out throughout Asia to buy and to sell, to trade. And in the process, they carried and spread the gospel wherever they went. Like bees, they cross pollinated with the gospel. They did it relationally, they did it virally, they did it person to person. Now, here's my point. Christianity did not overcome pagan practices of the Roman Empire by telling pagans to stop behaving like pagans. And Christianity did not convert an empire by inviting pagans to church. Christianity transformed an empire by inviting pagans to dinner. Christianity changed an empire through relationships. Can you invite your pagan neighbor to dinner, to lunch, to coffee, or tea? The early Christians did it relationally, virally, person to person. The church grew through a multiplication process. Think multi-level marketing. I recruit and train you so that you can recruit and train the next person who will recruit and train the next person. The difference is the early church didn't do it for money or power. They did it because they passionately loved Jesus, but the process was the same. See, followers of Jesus were so in love with Jesus that they couldn't not shine his light. They couldn't not love their neighbor. They didn't get preachy. They didn't slam pagans for acting like pagans. They simply invited people into their lives. They were simply looking for people who were looking for God. Let me repeat that. They were simply looking for people who were looking for God. Can you do that? Now, I want you to look at this chart. Now, if this year you introduced one person to Jesus and then taught them how to walk with God so that the next year that person could introduce another person to Jesus and teach them to walk with God, how long would it take you to reach every American for Jesus simply by following this doubling process each year? It would take 29 years. That's less than half the expected lifetime of the average American. All you have to do is introduce one person to Christ each year and then teach them how to walk with God so that they can replicate the process with someone else next year. But what if 1,000 Christians in America who are passionately in love with Jesus adopted this process today? How long would it take then? It would take 19 years. It's simple math, not rocket science. Think of it like compounding interest. Now, most of us could see America transformed in our lifetime. Do you think we can find 1,000 Christians in America who are passionately in love with Jesus, who would be willing to adopt this historically proven process of change? I do. In fact, I'm convinced God already has far more than 1,000 faithful servants spread out across this nation. I cross paths with them all the time. They simply need to be fully trained, mobilized, and empowered. That's what Paul did at Ephesus. He trained and mobilized the disciples to go out and change the world, empowered by the Holy Spirit. You see, the first century model was not inviting pagans to church. It was inviting pagans to dinner. It was inviting them into your home. It was inviting them into your life. It wasn't the preaching of the gospel. It was the relating of the gospel. Like the Apostle Paul modeled, it was the daily discussion of the gospel, equipping every man and woman to unashamedly carry the gospel with them wherever they went. In other words, instead of being the problem, we can quickly become the solution. We can shine his light in the darkness. Does that sound doable to you? Note, I didn't say easy. I said doable. Let me digress for a moment. When the communists took over Russia in 1917, there were 150 million Russians. How many of those Russians do you think were members of the Communist Party at the time? 8,000. 8,000 communists took control of a nation of 150 million people. The point is, a handful of people, if they are willing to die if necessary for their convictions, can change the course of history. John Knox, the leader of the Scottish Reformation, put it this way: "Give me Scotland or I die." Will you pray with me? Lord, give me America or I die. Do you want to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem? Would you like to help change America? Would you like to see America become one nation under God again, not by force like the communists did, but by free choice? You can help transform America just as the early Christians transformed the pagan Roman Empire. Now, I want you to imagine what an America overflowing with true followers of Jesus would look like. You could do business on a handshake, as my grandfather and great grandfather did. My great grandfather used to do major oil deals on a handshake. Can you imagine? Planned Parenthood would go out of business because they wouldn't have enough clients. Yay! Your young children would be able to safely roam the neighborhood without fear. There'd be a lot less road rage. Every Bible believing church would have 3 Sunday morning services just to accommodate the crowds. Politicians would keep their word. Wow. Cops would spend more time writing traffic tickets than breaking up domestic disputes. And you could freely say, the Bible says, and people would listen rather than trying to cancel you. What's your vision for America? Do you even have one? What would you like America to become in the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What do you think God's heart for America is? Folks, it's not too late, but there is an if. It won't just happen. It will only happen if God's people show up and do it God's way, reflecting His light. Now, over the next few weeks, I'm going to talk about what that would look like. I'm going to talk about the if and provide you with some tools. Now, here's the first tool. If you want America's best years to be in front of her, then you must ask God to give you a vision for how you can be the difference. If you don't have a God-given vision, what's the point? If God doesn't give you a dream in your heart for how you can be the difference, you will never have the strength to see it through. You see, God offers you an incredible adventure for your life. That'll be both exciting and, yes, hard. But if the vision is from Him, He'll give you the strength you need each and every day. All you have to do is suit up, show up, and do the next required thing, empowered by the Spirit of God. You see, the vision God gave me for America, it requires a hard choice, going off the cancer treatments, at least for now. Apart from God's intervention, I know I'm shortening my life, that my doctors have told me so. But the vision is worth fighting for, living for, and yes, dying for. God's people joining together to shine His light in such a way as America has not seen in a long, long time, making God the issue in every area of life so that our neighbors want what we have. But there is one question you must answer first. Do you love God with your whole heart, like so many of the early Christians did? Do you? If you can't say that, but you'd like to, let me help you. Go to brightmedia.org and download an electronic version of the book, First Love. It's free. My dad wrote it toward the end of his life. He wrote over 100 books and booklets in his lifetime. But of this one, he said, this is the most important book I have ever written. And it's also one of the shortest, by the way. It's a quick, easy read. If you ever wonder why the Christian life isn't working for you, if you ever wonder why the joy and peace that Jesus promised is not your normal daily experience, if you ever wonder why you don't see God do incredible things through you, if you ever wonder why you feel like you're on this spiritual roller coaster of emotional highs and lows, if you ever wonder why you feel so powerless, this book is for you. You see, this is what enabled the early Christians to transform a pagan empire that persecuted Christians into the Holy Roman Empire that acknowledged that the God of heaven rules in the affairs of men and of nations. They didn't do it through coercion or programs, strategies, or even the preaching of the gospel. We do need to preach the gospel. The Apostle Paul did with great effect, and Jesus commanded it. But Christians transformed the Roman Empire by relating the good news to their neighbors. So go to brightmedia.org and download your free electronic copy of First Love. It's my gift to you. It's my investment in the future of America. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Will you take a step of faith today and ask God to help you reflect His light in the darkness? Will you choose to be part of the solution for America? You see, a small flame can set an entire culture aflame. And please join me next week. I'm going to give you another tool to help you turn up the light of Jesus. I'm going to talk about what made the difference between the frightened Peter, who denied Christ 3 times just before the crucifixion, and the fearless Peter, just 50 days later, openly proclaiming the resurrection and deity of Jesus at the risk of his own life. How did Peter go from fearful to fearless in 50 days? What made the difference? If you don't know, then it's no wonder you're afraid to publicly talk about Jesus. You missed something. You missed something really important. And I want to help equip you to better respond to the challenge and opportunity of the if. And each week after that, I'll give you another tool until your toolbox is full. Of course, if major issues come up along the way, I may digress for a week to address a specific hot topic. But then I will swing back around to helping you fill your toolbox. God is the issue in every issue, especially when it comes to the if. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today. And if you found this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe. And when subscribing, don't forget to click on the bell so you'll be notified whenever I publish a new podcast. God bless.